Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Jim Blaney with ITSM Product Marketing, and we're glad that you could join us for this community webcast. Today, we'll be talking about demystifying the upgrade process. Of course, we want everyone to be on the latest release, and I think quite a few customers out there have questions about process, about tips, issues that they run into, and so today we'll want to take a look at demystifying that upgrade process. And with us today is Alex Peretti, one of our ITSM experts who's going to take us through today's presentation. Just to mention, we will be taking questions throughout the presentation, and also at the end we'll have an open forum for some Q&A. Just want to mention that if you have a question, to unmute your lines, but if you don't have a question, please keep your lines muted. We'd like to keep the recording as clean as possible for everyone's benefit. So with that, I will pass things over to Alex to get us started.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. As Jim mentioned, we do have a Q&A going on, and I have a colleague, John Israel, who's another support engineer for the Service Desk Manager and part of the Service Management Suite. He's going to be fielding the questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, just keep them to the Q&A, and as was mentioned at the end, we'll have the audio Q&A session. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Once again, we're going to be discussing the name of the presentation today is Demystifying the Upgrade Process, and we're going to talk about upgrading service management, the different components. A lot of the information that we're going to present here today, it should be useful for any customer, whether you're a small shop with just a couple dozen analysts or whether you're a big one with thousands of analysts. Tried to keep this pretty broad so that anybody can get some useful information out of here. So let's go ahead and go to the opening here. So this is the agenda for today's presentation. We're going to talk about why to upgrade, different reasons, different benefits of doing so. We're going to kind of delve into the not-so-secret keys to success. We're going to talk about a couple of the migration tools to help assist you in the migration, the upgrade. There's some helpful resources, which are some URLs, which won't be too useful during this presentation itself, but if you get a copy of the presentation after it's posted, you'll have some useful links to get in there. And then, of course, like was mentioned, the Q&A session. So let's go ahead and get started. So why upgrade? And this is really one of the key questions here. What are the benefits? Why would you upgrade? It can be a big process. It can take months to plan and roll out. So why would anybody want to go through this process? Well, there's a couple of benefits. First of all, you're staying on a supported release. And we're going to delve into each of these in a little bit more detail. You're going to ensure that you receive the best level of support possible and, of course, also to gain new functionality. So as far as staying on a supported release, I have here the end of service dates for the different components of service management. So as you see here, it was bolded up at the top. Service Management 12.9 was recently posted that the EOS date is March 31st, 2018. So it's less than a year away if you're using 12.9. It's definitely a good idea to start thinking about what you want to do with your upgrade plan and how you're going to proceed. I also have listed here some end of service dates for some older releases, which I'm sure many of you may be using some of these older releases. And you do need to be aware that at this point, you're technically not on a release that is supported. So you definitely want to try to get to a release that is supported to get all the additional benefits. As far as the supportability options, just to run through this, for when a version goes end of service, there's no more published fixes released for that release. So there won't be any cumulative patches or any one-off fixes. No new code creation at all. There's also a limited ability to receive standard support, which this is an important one. There's limited options and things that a support engineer can provide on a release that's not supported. So it does hinder the process. There's vulnerability concerns. Some of the older versions of the different products are bundled with older versions of Tomcat and Java, which could be susceptible to vulnerabilities. Those vulnerability problems cannot be fixed because the older versions cannot use the newer versions of Tomcat and Java. Different things of that nature. So you're leaving your environment vulnerable by using older releases. Of course, you do have access to the communities and self-service. That's still available to you. I don't want you to think you're completely cut off. But there's a great hindrance to using an end-of-service release. Now, as far as benefits, new features. I have here just a brief list of features that were added to the Service Management Suite since version 14.1. So this is 14.1 in any cumulative patches and also in 17.0. So in those releases, I'm not going to go over the different features, but this kind of gives you a view of the different things that are being added to the product, the different products. And also to note, many of these features come from ideas that were posted to the communities. And they were ideas that users and customers just like you had requested and wanted. And those have been delivered in these newer versions. So you're kind of losing the ability to gain all these new features. Like I said, this is just a snippet. I just kind of grabbed a couple of the top level ones, but there's many more on top of it. If I included everything, this slide would kind of look kind of unwieldy. So this is just a sampling of the different features that have been added since 14.1. So we're going to kind of get into the meat of things here, the not-so-secret keys of success. And I'm not going to lie to you here. There's no magic formula. The keys of success are very basic. Planning plus testing equals success. And we're going to go into each of those in detail here. So as far as planning, I kind of broke planning down into two sections. First is the pre-planning. Before anything happens, when you first have the idea, should we upgrade to the latest release, which right now 17.0 is the latest release of the Service Management Suite. You have the thought that comes to your mind, and hopefully you're thinking it now and even through this presentation, but kind of these are the list of questions that you should be thinking along the lines of. I quote a quote here by Benjamin Franklin, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." And this is a major key. There's so many times where I've seen people attempt upgrades without a proper plan in place, and things just do not work out very well. So some questions to consider. Is your current environment meeting your business needs? So today you may be using just a single service desk server, but maybe it's overloaded and maybe it's slow, and you know there's more users that are going to be coming on board soon. So you kind of need to question, is the current environment even meeting your needs anymore? Should you consider a bigger environment? As far as the operating systems and database versions, will they be compatible with the newer releases? If you're using an older operating system, that's something you need to be concerned with. Will you be performing an in-place upgrade, or is it going to be a completely new environment? Depending on the history of the system, maybe it makes sense to just start with a fresh install of the application. Are there any customizations? And if there are they still needed? Many times we have customizations, carry them forward, and they just keep being carried forward version after version, and they may not even be relevant anymore. I know that there are some specific customizations that people have introduced into their environments that are actually now part of the regular product, but they're still carrying the customized version of it forward. So you need to be aware of what customizations there are and whether they're still required and whether your business needs even need them anymore. Integrated products, will they need to be upgraded too? That's something definitely to be concerned with. Which new features to enable? Will new servers be needed for them? Just because there are new features, and a lot of them are really nice and helpful, maybe they do not help your business need at all. So just something else to think about. And what is the timeline of the upgrade? Is it realistic? Is your timeline to try to get this upgraded in a week? If so, maybe you may want to rethink that, because it's probably not a very realistic expectation. So you need to think about all these kind of things. And these are the questions you should be asking. Then we kind of get into the main planning phase. So you've had, in the first slide, I mentioned the question of the operating system and database, and really you're going to want to think about this thing first. What if the current operating system and database do need to be upgraded? Will your current install work on the newer version of the operating system or database, and can these be upgraded prior? With the database, you may have some more flexibility. Depending on whether your current version supports the newer version of the database or not, you may be able to move the database prior to you actually performing the regular full upgrade. Operating system could be a little more tricky. Maybe you want to upgrade the operating system on the day of the upgrade as part of just like a swing environment. That's up to you, but it may be something you want to consider as well. As far as what applications to upgrade, if you're integrating with process automation or embedded entitlement manager, EEM, those should probably be upgraded first. One of the benefits of that is that as part of the unified installer, there's an automatic integration process that will automatically integrate the different service management products with these other components. So it's a good thing to plan out to get those upgraded first. If you are using the full suite, so if you're using the asset portfolio management in your environment, you're probably going to want to upgrade that one first before doing anything else. But as far as the other products, Service Desk Manager and Service Catalog, you could typically do them in either order. It's not a strong reason to do one way or the other. Another part of your planning is mapping everything out that uses the application. There's so many times where I hear stories of a migration being completed, and then all of a sudden something doesn't work because there wasn't an understanding that it even existed. So it's a good idea to kind of get a full understanding of your environment and see everything that's touching your applications. And a part of that is the user base. Will training be needed for your users? That's something that often gets lost in the mix. We just assume that the user base is going to just adopt without much knowledge or information. And depending on what changes are introduced in the newer versions, they may need some training. And then, of course, there's other integrated products. Could they be affected? There's possibility of web services app integrations, email integrations, maybe other integrations I'm not even thinking of. These are all things you need to make sure you understand and map out as you're going into your upgrade. Scaling the environment. So one of the main recommendations I usually have is you're going to want to limit the components installed on your primary application servers. If it comes down to it, you could definitely stand up secondary servers and install components there to kind of offload. But you really want the primary server to be left to handle all the processes it needs to do. And of course, be redundant. Don't be, obviously there's always going to be financial reasons where you're restricted to what servers you have access to. But when you're running your business here, you don't want to skimp on the hardware too much. If you only have one application server, you're creating a single point of failure. You want to be able to spread things out, have redundancy where it's possible. And then the last part of the planning is create a backup plan. And this is another thing that gets overlooked way too often. If you're performing the upgrade on an existing server, if it's a VM, make sure you take a snapshot first, or that a snapshot is going to be taken on the day of the actual upgrade. Or if it's not a VM, make sure you make a full backup of the installed folder. And then plan to have a full backup of the database as well and make sure it's validated. You need to make sure if things don't go quite smoothly, you do have a method and a plan to get back your environment to a running state as quickly as possible. As far as testing the migration, this is the next step of the process. After you're planning and after you kind of understand where you're going to go and what you're going to do, the testing phase really needs to begin. And one of the main I guess, reasons for success in most upgrades is a proper test plan. And you usually want to create a replica environment when it's possible. For asset portfolio management, there's a database copy procedure. In the presentation when you download it, there's links that are provided that provide you that procedure. You can review that later on. There's some configuration changes and also an EEM cert utility to help you create a replica environment, and then you can actually test the upgrade. As far as Service Test Manager, there's the well-known Swingbox method. You basically start with a completely clean install of the same version of the product that you're currently using. So let's say, for example, you're using 12.9. You would build a completely clean 12.9 system. Then you would back up and restore the database, follow post steps, which are all documented in the same links that you can review later on. And then you're going to restore your customizations. And then at that point, you basically have a matching environment to what you're running in production. Assure that it works before you do anything else. That's another common mistake. Just setting up the environment, but it doesn't actually work, the replica environment. If you're starting at a bad space, then you're never really going to get anywhere. Then once you know everything is working, everything is good, then you can go ahead and test your upgrade process. One of the benefits of testing the upgrade is you could also determine the length of time the upgrade takes. So you can kind of set your proper planning that you're going to need an outage for X number of hours because that's how long the upgrade takes. I didn't kind of mention the service catalog testing environment. That is a fairly simple procedure to create a replica environment. I didn't really have any documentation to share on that, but it's a pretty straightforward process as well. So then once you have your replica environment all upgraded, then that's when you're really going to begin your functionality testing. You're going to review the new functionality, which will benefit your business. Once again, like I mentioned, just because there is a new feature, it may not make sense for you to actually implement it. So test it, make sure that it's benefiting your business. Customization review. You're going to merge desired ones and remove those that are no longer needed. That's all going to be part of your post-upgrade testing plan. As far as validation testing, get real end users involved. You need to make sure your user base, especially your heavy users, are getting a test at the new version before you go into production so that you don't run into so many questions that come up. You know, why is this not working the same way that it used to work? Different things of that nature. A lot of that comes down to the customers, the end users are just not aware of what changes are coming. Get them involved. And of course, the other thing is work out any kinks in the process while you're doing your testing. It's better now than on the day of the upgrade. If something is not working right with the upgrade, or if something acts a little different than expected, you could work those out through internal testing or even contacting CA support and get those things worked out before you decide to upgrade. And I mentioned here, rinse and repeat if needed. Make sure you feel comfortable. So depending on how your testing went the first time, you may or may not want to consider starting all over again and trying from the beginning, testing this multiple times to make sure you understand the upgrade and feel comfortable with it. And then prior to actually performing the real-world upgrade, you're going to want to make sure you inform your customer success advocate here at CA. You could also contact support and let us know about your plans, and we can set an alert associated to your account so that we are aware of your plans, which helps us to be able to help you. So don't try to keep these upgrades done in secret. Get us involved, get CA involved so that we can be here to help you out. As far as the tools, we're going to just touch on a couple of things here. So there's two main tools of the installer. There's firstly the actual installer itself, the unified installer. Of course, what this does is it's going to detect the version of the product that's already installed and then perform the correct install task for that version. So if you're using a much older version, the tasks that it needs to perform are slightly different than if you're upgrading from a newer release. So the installer will handle all that. It's going to remotely connect to the database server. In earlier versions, specifically of Service Desk Manager, when you were performing the MDB install, you actually had to go to the database server and perform a database install process, which this was usually to the displeasure of DBAs everywhere, trying to get access to the database server. It was sometimes quite difficult. But thankfully, with the newer unified installer, which just began in 14.1 and continues in 17.0, you actually don't even need to be on the physical database. You could just run the installer and it will deploy the database remotely or upgrade the database remotely as well. And also, there's auto integration tasks that it performs. So depending on which products you have, let's say you're using Service Test Manager and Service Catalog and have unified self-service, it will integrate all these products together automatically with the installer if you select all three of the products during the install process, which saves through some of the manual steps. Also, if EEM is involved or process automation, same thing. The integrations will handle that automatically. Also, starting in 17.0, there was introduced a Service Desk Manager customization upgrade utility. This is a new tool that basically performs comparisons on your HTML and CSS customizations. It will then attempt to merge the customizations into the newer version of the forms. And it's semi-automatic in nature. There is some initial configuration that needs to be performed, but then once the initial configuration is performed, then it kind of goes through its thing automatically. And it is a helpful thing. It currently does not have the ability to affect any custom spell code or mod files, but it will try to merge form customizations into place. And I have just a quick slide here that kind of expands on that tool a bit, because I'm sure many of you maybe had just started reviewing the 17.0 plans and are kind of figuring out what you want to do there, may not even be aware this tool exists. So how does it work? Well, firstly, you would have a copy of the current version. So let's say you're using Service Desk Manager 12.9 again. You get a copy of those files as a baseline. You get your customized files from the 12.9 environment. It then does a comparison with the latest release. So let's say 17.0, it makes a comparison to there. It would then attempt to merge the files and output them to a target location. And the utility generates a log file containing the status of each file, whether it was merged, unable to merge, or copied. Depending on the complexity of the customization, the tool may not be able to perform the merge. But for any basic changes, let's say adding new fields, renaming things, setting different flags, those kind of things will probably be able to be merged relatively easily. And any files that did not successfully merge would need to be merged manually. So the tool, it's not going to, like I said, it's not going to merge everything, but it should help with a large bulk of your customizations. And this is really a major problem that we often see is confusion on how to perform these merges or just handling the customization moving from one release to the other. So we're hoping that this tool will help out with that. And that's kind of segue, that's really the main part of the presentation. It's really the bulk of it. There's going to be the Q&A section. But before we end and go to the Q&A, I just wanted to promote here an upcoming session that's going to be at the end of the month. And I kind of labeled this side, the best laid plans of mice and men. And it's kind of an allusion to an old Scottish poem. Basically, we could have the best plans in the world. We could perform all the testing. Everything can be exactly perfect, and still things may not go right. And it happens. And I'm not going to act like it doesn't happen. But we're going to try to present and discuss a bunch of those potential problems in a session that's occurring at the end of this month. It's called the Service Management Upgrade Troubleshooting. It's going to be June 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and we have the RSVP there. And I really would encourage everybody. Today we kind of just discussed architecture, things to consider, things of that nature. we're really going to dive more into the problems in that next presentation. Of course, if anybody does have questions on problems, we could try to address them today. But just to let you know, we do have a whole session coming up in just a few weeks on that. And with that, just going to browse through. We have the helpful resources. This is not very presentation friendly, but I hope that when this presentation gets posted, you'll review these links, and hopefully they'll help you out with your upgrade. And we're going to go ahead and open up for questions. So thank you, everybody, for listening to the presentation today. I hope that it helped you out. But, of course, if you do have any questions, you can hit #6 to open up for the audio. Or you can, of course, just post into the Q&A session as well. John, Israel, did you receive any particular questions that maybe we should highlight today before we open up the floor? I think John's just having...
Hey guys, sorry. All right, I'm unmuted. So we did get one question, and that question was from, I'll tell you in 1 second here. That question was Chris Dunn. I don't know why I can't see my QA thing now. Hang on 1 sec, guys. I apologize. There we go. So the question was that she had seen on an earlier slide that there is now that was the new feature slide, Alex, that you had stated, that there's now a retry mechanism for failed PAM processes, and she wanted to see if there was some more information on that. So in the QA, I provided the link to the documentation where it talks about that feature and what it can do.
Oh, thanks, John. Yeah, and I should note that that feature is specific for Service Desk Manager. But yeah, there is a retry feature there, and it's very useful so you don't have to manually restart processes. I see a couple of questions out there with questions about the recording, and we will make sure that is posted. Next question from Andrea. How often do you recommend using the Springbox for upgrades versus the in-place? No, I think those questions just came in, so it's not even a big deal. So how often do you recommend using the Springbox for upgrades? If you are using a version of the operating system that is not going to be supported on 17.0, for example, then really Springbox is probably the only way you're going to want to go. It's very important to make sure you're getting on a supported release. And my Q&A session got a little wonky here. Hold on 1 sec. All right. Yeah, so how often? I'd say Springbox, one of the main benefits of that is getting on a clean system. A lot of times, especially if you've been using Service Desk for a while and upgrading various releases, there's a lot of baggage that gets carried from release to release, a lot of older files in place. And often just starting with a clean system is just easier. The other benefit of Springbox is that if you do need to revert for some reason, you could always just go back to the original environment and then just go to a snapshot of the database, and you'll be up and running relatively quickly. But that really, they both have their major benefits. Springbox is often the recommended procedure, though, I would say. Is there a new version of EEM released with 17.0? There is a, we're currently in process of performing a certification for the latest version of EEM. With the 17.0 install, I don't believe there is a newer version than what was on the 14.1, but there is certification process going on for the, 12.5.1 is delivered on the install media, but we're currently in certification for the current release, the newest release of EEM. But it's not on the ISO file. Hopefully that answers that question, Vishnu. Are there any other questions today? All right, so we have 2 questions. How do you compare patch levels between versions? We have certain patches installed on Service Catalog 12.9. How do we know what patches are required for 14.1 or 17? Well, that's one of the good things when you're going from 12.9. the version of the patches that you're using in 12.9 is not really that important for the upgrade. It will just bring you up to the, so let's say you use the 17.0 installer, which is, if you were planning out an upgrade, maybe a good idea to consider moving to the latest release. It would take your 12.9 regardless of what patch level you're on and move you to 17. There's no prerequisite of a patch being applied to your service catalog environment. Hopefully that answers that question. Let's see. Andrea Holmes, how does the new PAM installation also remotely connect to the DB server to run the commands? I'm fairly sure it does. But I'm not 100% sure. It's probably something we could follow up with on. I can't remember off the top of my head. May I know when the supportability ends for Services Manager 12.9? As I mentioned one of the earlier slides, May 2018 is when the end of service date for 12.9 is. So you got a little less than a year to start thinking about your upgrade plan. Any other questions out there?
It's March 31st.
Yeah, March 31st, 2018.
I'm trying to find out the information right now about that PAM question. That's a good question about the running the DB commands remotely. So what I'm told is that PAM makes JDBC connections, so it should be able to do that remotely. So it should be no problem for that one.
All right, cool. Yeah, thank you for checking on that, John. All right, is that, yeah, I think still no other questions out there?
Again, folks, if you want to ask an audio question, you can do #6 on your phone, and that'll open up your line to ask an audio question.
Okay, we got another question. Any feedback on known upgrade issues with 17.0 upgrade for SDM at this moment? Yeah, most of the testing has gone pretty well that we've seen. I'd say a lot of the similar problems that you may run into even with 14.1 are similar problems you would run into 17.0, which we're going to dive into it further in the next presentation. But if there's some database inconsistency issues, different things like that, if you had a problem with 14.1 or if you would have a problem with 14.1, you probably would have a problem with 17.0 as well, because it's based on the same architecture, the installer. But for the most part, nothing's jumping out at me. I'd say the main thing that's important is if you do integrate with APM, that you do upgrade APM first. There's some weird issues you may run into if you install services before APM. They can be rectified, but it probably is for the best to just install APM first. That's the only main issue I could really mention, highlight here.
Okay, do we have any more questions for the guys? Doesn't look like you have any more questions, Alex.
Okay, and of course, if anybody has any questions after the fact, you know, when this is all posted to communities, of course, me and John were on the communities on a regular basis. You could always find us there. And then even on the presentation we're doing at the end of the month, if you have a question, on the planning and upgrade process, we could also discuss that then and there as well. There's many ways to reach me and John. Svetlana, let's see, you said you had a question. Let me see, was it not addressed? Hold on.
Svetlana, I think your
question may have been lost.
Yeah, you might need to re-ask it. Maybe you didn't ask it to everyone because I can't see it either.
Or you could just unmute, just have an open forum question.
Okay. Cash flow when the swing box is the same. I would say yes. You're going to want to make your swing box system as close as possible to what you're using in production so that you're doing an apt comparison. Typically when you're migrating or upgrading, the patch level is not super important, but if at all possible, I'd say make it as close to your production as you can. Especially, you know, you mentioned 12.9, but especially with 14.1, where you have a bunch of newer components, like there was Xflow introduced, for example, you're probably going to want to make sure you have all that in place prior to upgrading to 17.0. So 12.9 on a lesser scale, but it's still something that's probably a good idea.
Alex, I think we've come to the end here. I don't think we're going to get any more questions.
All right, cool.
Let me just get another one. Okay. Well, maybe I'll just go ahead and wrap things up. Alex, I'd like to say thanks. John, thank you for helping out. Appreciate it. And for everyone out there, I think Alex had already mentioned that we do have kind of a part 2 to the whole upgrade series scheduled for June 27th at 11 Eastern. So, you know, please, if you do have questions or issues with your current upgrade or going through the process, please join. It'll be a wealth of information that we'll be able to provide in that forum. So, again, I'd like to say thank you, Alex. Thanks to everyone joining today. And we look forward to speaking to you on June 27th for the next part 2 in the series. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.